Here's a special important message.
All right, hello, welcome to We Are the Road Crew, the podcast which takes you behind the scenes in the world of music and gives you all the juicy gossip about how some of your favourite gigs of all time came together. I am your host, Stephen Hill. I don't know why I went, that was a little bit Elvis, I apologise for that. But I'm here, I am still here, no matter how wonky my mouth goes. Today we have a very, very exciting show for you. Thank you very much for tuning in. Before we start, we always, as ever, as we have done on every episode in season 2 of the podcast, I want to say a big thank you to our mates over at Signature Brew who sent me a pub. I'm still going through that pub. If you're a long time listener, you're like, mate, how many drinks did they send you? They sent me plenty. Thanks very much. Just tried a Backstage IPA, as a matter of fact, only last night, named in tribute to all of the backstage antics that go on, and a bit of a favourite for bands, tour riders by all accounts. So I can confirm it is a very lovely drink to have on a sunny Saturday night. East London Signature Brew, obviously, as I've said before, have been brewing music inspired beers for a very long time. Since 2011 they've collaborated with the likes of Mastodon, Idols, Slaves, Mogwai, Enter Shikari, many more. If you are a listener to the podcast and you'd like to get 10% off of their beers, then you can go to signaturebrew.co.uk and use the code Road Crew in the checkout, and you'll get 10% off all of those delicious beverages. Right, anyway, on to our guest this week. This week we are very, very delighted to be joined by Michelle Pettinanto, who is a live sound engineer and has been for nearly 30 years. Michelle got her start very, very early on and has worked with some huge acts from the time, getting a start with the Spin Doctors. I'm definitely going to talk to her about Spin Doctors. If you're of a certain age and you don't remember who the Spin Doctors are, they're the one who did the song Two Princes. They did some other songs as well, but that is the big one. I'm going to make the case for the fact that they are not one-hit wonders. But anyway, she got to start touring with the Spin Doctors in the 90s and has worked with everyone from Elvis Costello to Adam Lambert, not Adam Lambert and Queen, just Adam Lambert, the Goo Goo Dolls, Gwen Stefani, Mr. Big, Styx, loads and loads of people. So we're going to be chatting to Michelle about all of those things, all of those acts, and about a long and varied career doing sound for a very, very eclectic group of musicians. I just want to say as well, usually we are recording at Factory Studios in London. I'm actually sat at home in my kitchen at the moment doing this, which is not quite as swanky, to be honest. But hey, during the global pandemic that we're currently going through, you just take what you can get. So we hope to be back there very, very soon, hopefully for season 3. And if you want to give us some love, you can go over to our Facebook page, find us on Facebook, find us on Instagram, follow us on Twitter at Road Crew Pod, and maybe even leave a little lovely review. We'd very much appreciate that. But anyway, on with the podcast. You don't want to hear me waffling on and on and on. This is me talking to Michelle Pettinato. All right, Michelle joins us from, first of all, where are you? And second of all, how have you been getting on during what I've been speaking to people throughout this series, this kind of COVID-19 crisis, which has seen the music industry grind to a halt?
Well, I'm in Scranton, Pennsylvania, which is in the northeast corner of the U.S. Let's see. I was on tour with Elvis Costello in March when everything kind of shut down, and we were actually in the UK, and we almost finished our tour. We were just ahead of it, but we had to cancel our last 3 shows because they were going to stop flights coming back to the US. So he wanted to make sure everybody got home, and I've been home since I think March 16th, and like thousands of others, all of my work and income for this year has just disappeared. And but oddly enough, I've been incredibly busy since being home. I released an online course for EQ and critical listening. That was the first thing I did when I came home. And then I've been doing a ton of webinars, podcasts, and Zoom panels, discussions like that. And some school visits via Zoom, talking to students and things like that. But it's been really, really busy. I'd love to go back on the road and just get a break. But and aside from that, and one thing I did was I also built a giant catico for my 8 cats in the backyard.
Oh, wow. Now that is something that I know. Talking about cats is something I do definitely know about. Yeah, you 8 cats.
8 cats. Yeah, I'm a sucker. They were all feral born, and I live kind of in the woods, and it started out with, there's 2 little kittens, and I'll get them trapped and tamed and fixed and find them homes, and then next thing you know, you get attached, and then there's another one and another one, and you end up with 8.
Wow. That must play havoc with you when you can go out on tour, having to worry about getting someone to come around and feed the cats.
They actually have a great system. We've got automatic feeders, automatic litter boxes, and then I have a cat sitter that comes every other day just to, check on everything, and it's all worked really well. So now I don't know what they're going to do when do go back on tour. They're so used to having me home that it's going to be oh God, what's going on? So,
well, I think off air I might get some tips from you about cats because I've got one cat and I basically treat her like some sort of Egyptian god. You know what I mean? I absolutely love her to death, much to my girlfriend's annoyance, who's probably listening from the other room. But anyway, let's not talk too much about cats. So, I mean, how frustrating is it for you? This is something I haven't actually asked someone. Is how much of that other stuff you're doing has felt like it can actually fill the gap of live music? Because I think live music is kind of the one thing that's almost impossible to replicate, whether you're working in it or actually going to experience it. How much of those things that you are filling the gaps with have actually kind of fed that hunger that you have for doing your job in the same way?
It hasn't really filled that gap, but I'm at a point where I've been doing this for so long that the last several years I've been really working on trying to give back and mentoring a lot of young aspiring engineers and talking to students. And I really enjoy that. Like, I really love passing on the knowledge and helping people who are getting started, so it's really been fulfilling, in that aspect. But as far as the mixing, I don't have a home studio. I don't have gear, I spend my life touring and I come home and it's okay, relax and chill out. It's not work again. So, we always say people, tend to have nightmares about gigs. Like you might have a really tough gig and you start having gig-mares about it. You dream like, you're doing a gig and everything's going wrong. And we call it gig-mares. Well, I've been having dreams about actually mixing, like not gig-mares, just, I've been mixing so much that I'm dreaming that I'm out mixing a gig. And then I wake up and it's like, oh yeah, that's not going to happen anytime soon. And so it is, it's, there's some things that are, the webinars and all that stuff is it's enjoyable, but then the actual craft and the art of the job, it's, there's no way to do that.
Yeah.
Being home. So.
Yeah. Very frustrating for everyone, but before we kind of come full circle to the future, let's go right back to the very start of your career. I actually, as I said before we started recording, I found a little interview with you online. And one of the things I noticed that you said in that was that although you were passionate about music, the idea of actually getting up in front of people was quite daunting to you. Mm-hmm. So take me back to your kind of first experiences with live music, playing or experiencing it, and kind of how you found yourself and what you wanted to do.
Yeah, well, it's my earliest memories, there was always music in my life, my family, we always had the radio on or the stereo. And I started playing piano when I was probably about 5 years old. I had an aunt who she played, and my grandparents lived right next door. So they had a piano and she, would teach me a couple little songs. So then I started taking lessons in grade school. And I loved music. Like there was always music on somewhere, I was always had it on in the background but I was really shy and I hated, attention, and I hated the thought of being in the spotlight. So as I was getting older, I desperately wanted to be part of music, but I didn't want to be a musician because I just couldn't even, handle the thought of, I would play piano for, the church choir, and I would play for the school chorus. And in that situation, I'm like, well, there's so many other people up here. No one's noticing me, but then I had friends who would compete in vocal competitions or in talent shows, and they'd ask me to accompany them. And I'd be like, well, can we do this? Can I just be behind the curtain playing? Because I was terrified. I had terrible stage fright. Yeah. So I think it was, I was a teenager and I was getting to that point in in high school where you're trying to figure out what you're going to do with your life. And this is back in the days of vinyl, in MTV's early days when it was just videos nonstop. And I was just absorbed in it, like as much as I could get. And I remember listening to, we had a really eclectic record collection, everything from Johnny Cash to Kiss to Herb Alpert, and the Tijuana Brass. And two albums that I think were kind of formative were Queen's Day at the Races and Night at the Opera. And I would just lay in bed at night with my headphones on, listening to these records over and over and just being blown away by what I was hearing. Like, how are they making this sound so huge? And I would also read the records, like the liner notes cover to cover on every album I had. And the one thing I noticed was on every single record, there was this person called a recording engineer. And I had no idea what that was, but I thought, well, they must be important because they're on every record. So then I started looking into it and I realized, these are the people that actually make the records. So it just kind of clicked. Like, that's what I'm going to do. Like, this way I can still be creatively involved in music, but not have to be a performer and be on stage. And, so then, that was kind of it. That was my mission. I was going to be a recording engineer.
Right. Okay. And how about actually going to live show? I mean, do you remember the first time you actually went to a concert, like whether it be a big concert or, something a little bit low key and more local? Do you kind of remember what that gig was?
Yeah, I remember, I think the first concert I saw was Air Supply because my mother was so overprotective. And, I grew up in a tiny little town in the middle of nowhere and the big world out there is very scary. So my mother was convinced that, you're going to get, you can't go to a concert. You're going to get kidnapped and sold off into white slavery. It's like, okay, whatever. All right. So, Air Supply was coming through and my friend had a neighbor who was a young couple, but they were married and they were like, well, we'll take you guys if you want to go. And we're like, it's a concert. Let's go. So it was, Air Supply was tame enough for my mother to allow it. So that was my first concert and then quickly followed by Alice Cooper, which was, quite the opposite.
What a jump.
Yeah. And like Air Supply was my mother's kind of, more her genre and Alice Cooper was what I was listening to. So once I survived that first one, I was, the doors were open. Now I can go to concerts but yeah, I remember just the energy of, and both of those, they were in arenas, so that energy that you're there in this crowd of people and there's this excitement and this energy and this, electricity in the air. I remember that, like, it really stuck with me. But, even at that though, I didn't realize that you could actually do live sound. I still was kind of focused on making records. I didn't even know that being a touring sound engineer was an option.
So how did that kind of mutate from being something that you wanted to do within the studio to becoming something that you did in a live music venue?
Well, so I decided then, in high school, I'm going to be a recording engineer and I went to college for a year to major in music and I realized this isn't going to get me where I need to be. So then I found this little technical school in Ohio called the Recording Workshop, which had a 3-week program in basic recording engineering. So I went there and after that, I got a job at a radio station for a little bit and then I moved to Nashville and I had a cousin who was living in Nashville and she said I could come down and stay with her and try and get a job. So I went to Nashville and spent 3 weeks walking around Music Row. And this is back in the 80s where, Nashville was it was studio after studio after studio. And I'm walking around with my tiny little resume that says, the Recording Workshop in WMGH and knocking on every door begging for a job and realizing I still have no idea how to get into this business or what I'm doing. So went back home and then I heard of this other school, Full Sail in Florida, that had a more expansive program. And I enrolled there. And when I was at Full Sail, they actually had a course on live sound. And that's when it just kind of, the light bulb went off that, oh my God, wait, you mean I can mix music and do this on tour and travel the world while doing it? Because that was another passion, was travel. I just wanted to get out and see the world. And so I just totally shifted gears there. And then from then on, it was live sound. And after school, I started working at a little sound company, just like a little tiny local sound company, mixing local bands, working in the shop, and just kind of started taking every job I could get in audio until I got my first tour.
Which I believe, if I'm right in saying, was with the band The Spin Doctors. Is that right?
Yep.
Right, okay. Now, there might be people listening who don't remember the Spin Doctors.
Or too young.
Yeah. You probably do know one of their songs. They had a massive hit with Two Princes. I had that on 7-inch vinyl back in, what would it have been, 1993? 92, yeah. Great song. And for a kind of hot minute, they were a big deal, that band, weren't they? They looked like they were going to be a really, really huge deal. What was it like working with that band, especially, I suppose, at a time where they would have just about been blowing up to, you know, this kind of hotly tipped thing that were going to be the next big thing?
Yeah, I mean, the timing for me was perfect because I started with them and they were just starting to get a buzz. And a month later, their album was in Billboard Top 100, you know, and it was just flying up the charts. So we were all kind of riding that wave together, and it was a blast. I mean, it was very much a family, you know, band and crew. When I'd started, we were just kind of, everybody was on one bus and with an occasional van tour here and there stuck in the middle. But my first gig with them was I did a club gig, and the next day we were on the Horde tour, which was, at the time, it was this big kind of hippie jam band festival tour. It was Blues Traveler, Bella Fleck, Aquarium Rescue Unit. I can't remember who else, but we were kind of like the third or fourth band on the main stage. So it was basically trial by fire because it was my first tour, my first, you know, real mixing gig. Like prior to that, I had done mixing, but on a much smaller scale. And we're doing 7,000 to 10,000 seat amphitheaters around the country. And we had no sound check. It was basically 20 minutes to get our stuff on stage, wire it up and line check it, and then go. Wow. And this was back in the days of analog. So it's not like you just put your file in the console and there's your show. It's starting from scratch every single day. So I learned how to pull a mix together really fast because our set was also only 20 minutes long. So you couldn't take 3 or 4 songs to get the mix sounding good. You had one song at best. Otherwise, you know, the set's over. So it was great because it really helped me, you know, learn my chops, you know, really helped my mixing skills. And then after that, we started doing a lot of like big college arena gigs and just, you know, they just kept taking off and kept getting bigger. And I think it was like 2 years later, we were on tour opening for the Rolling Stones on the Voodoo Lounge tour, playing like the biggest stadiums in the world. So, you know, that trial by fire was really good in preparing me for, you know, mixing in these giant stadiums on this huge tour. So yeah, it was really a blast. I mean, we had a great time. That's
a phenomenal rise for, I mean, to get that band and to kind of have your first job in the industry, essentially doing what you do now, to give you the opportunity to work out how to work all of those different rooms, from kind of, like you say, college campuses to festival stages to actual stadiums with the biggest rock band of all time. That couldn't really have worked out much better, could it?
I don't think so. Yeah, I mean, it was definitely, and it's funny because when I look back over my career, I see how every job I've had has prepared me for one of my jobs in the future. Like even before going on tour, all the different jobs that I did, you know, I learned skills that helped me do a good job when I got that first tour. That really helped prepare me for that. And then, you know, the being able to mix in any kind of environment with whatever you get, you know, whatever gear. And at the time, you know, gear was a lot less reliable than it is these days. You know, like you could get 1 out of every 10 PA systems was a good quality system. The majority were not, you know, and so it's just trying to learn how to make stuff sound good and make stuff that's not working, how to fix it, how to troubleshoot, and just be prepared to deal with whatever. And that's really kind of helped me for a lot of the jobs I've had since then. Yeah.
Yeah. I have to ask what it was like with the Stones around that time. I mean, firstly, did you ever get to breathe the same air as those people?
We did. I mean, it was amazing. They were actually big fans of the band, and that's why the Spin Doctors got offered the tour. And we did North America, some of Canada, and South America with them. And we were actually in South America during the Super Bowl. And I remember that we were staying, I mean, the Stones at this point had, you know, it was a huge stadium tour. They had 120 some people on their crew. that would, start building the show days before, because the set was so enormous. So their crew were all staying at another hotel, and our band, since there's only maybe 10 or 12 of us total with band and crew, we were staying at the same hotel that the Stones were. And it was Super Bowl Sunday, and everyone was trying to figure out where are we going to watch the Super Bowl. We're in South America. Who's going to care? So I remember the Stones crew had worked out. They told us, come to our hotel. We're going to be watching the Super Bowl. We've got this, there's a huge screen TV in the bar there. So we're going to go and everyone's going to watch the Super Bowl. We're going to have a great time. So our crew piles in a van, drives 45 minutes across town to their hotel. And we walk in the bar and they've got this like live Barbra Streisand concert on. And we're like, well, what's up? And they're like, yeah, well, we're getting a little conference room and they're going to set us up there. So we're hanging around for about 20 minutes and they've got a little tiny TV on a stand in a conference room with a bunch of, straight back chairs. And we're like, you know what? Let's just go back to our hotel. There's a sports bar there. It'll be way more comfortable. So we get in the van, we go back to our hotel. And as we're walking in the lobby, the Spin Doctors band assistant was like, where are you guys? The Stones are having a party. Come on. We're all invited. So we go up to whatever the penthouse floor and they've got this huge spread, and catered chafing dishes and fine china and silver and recliners in front of a huge screen TV. And there's the whole band, and it's just us and the Stones. And it was amazing. It was just like, oh my God, is that really Mick Jagger? And I'm sitting at a table and I remember my big claim to fame at the time was I was sitting there watching, just trying to stay out of the way and be, invisible. And Mick Jagger walks over and he looks at me and goes, is anyone using that spoon? No. He had just gotten dessert and he was looking for a spoon. And I was like, Mick Jagger spoke to me. But they were just, they were normal guys. They were just, easy to be around. It was never anybody that you can't talk to the band. You can't be around them. They were just totally cool. And it was really a really great time.
And what about the actual shows themselves? Because I think,
oh my God,
that that's a tough slot. There are certain gigs, people never want to support Slayer. People never want to support AC/DC, and I would imagine the Rolling Stones, again, if people go and see the Rolling Stones, they want to see the Rolling Stones. And in their minds, you're just kind of getting in the way of them.
Yeah.
That's obviously not true, but you're kind of getting in the way of them from watching the Rolling Stones. So how were the shows for the band?
You know what? I don't think any of us even cared because we were having such a great time. We didn't care. We're like, oh my God, we're doing this. We're opening for the Stones. So nobody really, we didn't get booed off the stage. So that was good. I remember we did Brazil and it was, 2 or 3 really big Brazilian bands after. So we were the first band. Then there was this, 2 big bands from Brazil and then the Stones. So no one cared about us then, but we had so much fun and we were treated so well that, we didn't care. It was just take it while it comes because you never know.
Did you struggle with because again, being the first band on in a stadium and it's empty as well. I've been to gigs where I've turned up to see the first band in a stadium supporting, Metallica or whoever. And it's a pretty difficult thing to get right, to get that sound to come across in that kind of echoey bowl.
Yeah.
How difficult did you find that, especially considering this is your first tour as well?
Right. I believe it was Shoko was the sound company at the time, and they had done such a great job of setting up the PA, and they had, plenty of delays, stacks everywhere. So they really had the PA dialed in. And lucky for me, my band was maybe 24 inputs at tops, and they were such good players that it was a fairly easy thing to mix because there wasn't there was no track. There was no, it was drums, bass, vocals, and guitar. So it was pretty straightforward. And, it wasn't as intimidating as I thought. I think just because at that point I'd been mixing the band almost nonstop for 2 years. So I had it pretty dialed in and it was just kind of all right, well, it's just more PA than I'm used to. So, and then, and like I said, they had it set up right. So I think that's a huge part of it. When the system tech puts up the PA and implements it and, has it dialed in correctly, it just makes your job that much easier. So.
Okay. I'm quite interested to know what happened to the Spin Doctors. And I mean, I don't know how long you worked with them, because people, I mean, I sort of jokingly called them a one-hit wonder. Jimmy Olsen's Blues and Little Miss Can't Be Wrong were also very, very big hits on this side of the pond, and I'm sure they were in America as well. So with all due respect to the Spin Doctors, but they did seem to just kind of vanish quite quickly.
Yeah.
What happened?
Well, there was that Stones tour. Actually, right before that, the original guitar player had quit, and they hired a new guitar player. So then they toured with him for a few years, and then they had, I think Ivan Neville joined the band for a bit. He played keyboards, and I worked for them up until 97, I guess it was, and then I had left. I don't know. They kind of broke up for a bit. There was a couple different reformations, and then I think they didn't do anything for a few years. And what happened was this club in New York City, the Wetlands, which was kind of a infamous New York club for all these type of bands, kind of where the Spin Doctors got their start. Well, they were closing, and they had reached out to all the bands that had, come up through there, asking if they would consider, coming in and doing a final show. So I think that was the first time that the original four guys got back together after quite some time. And they had a really good time. And they all, there was a lot of band politics and tension when I was there. There was a lot of stuff going on that it was just kind of like, oh, I can't work with you anymore. So when they did this Wetland show, they seemed to really get along well. They'd all grown up a bit, and they had so much fun that they said, well, let's try and do it again. So they started touring again, and they still do. They do a lot of like Weekend Warrior type stuff where they'll just go out and do 3 or 4 shows here and there. And, but, pretty regularly, but just not on the same scope that they had been before. And I think they put out a few albums as well. I think they did a blues record a couple of years ago. Right, which I heard was really, really good. And they just toured the UK a few years ago doing like a 20th anniversary or something of, or 25th anniversary of Pocket Full of Kryptonite, that record. So yeah, they're still out there. They're still plugging away here and there. Yeah. I haven't seen them. It's probably been at least 10 years since the last time I saw them. So.
Right. Okay. Right. Yeah. Fair enough. So what happened after finishing with the Spin Doctors, presumably having done all those venues and having done what is now quite a high profile band, you have an opportunity to cherry pick a couple of jobs and maybe do something that you're, kind of really into? Or was that not, I mean, your face tells me that maybe that wasn't quite the case.
No, I mean, it still was, my world of, who I knew in the business was still very small, because I'd been working with the same people for so long. Mm-hmm. So, after Spin Doctors, I went and did Joan Osborne, and, she was on the same management. So they hired me to do her tour. And she had the What If God Was One of Us song.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I did her for a couple of years, and, a couple other, little things here and there. But then my next big gig was Indigo Girls, which, I worked for them for like 7-8 years. And that came from a friend of mine who we became friends. The first tour that we carried production with Spin Doctors, the sound company that provided production, the guy who owned it, he told me at that point, he's like, if you ever need work, give me a call. So a few years later, I had a couple months off, and I went to work for him. And then he took me to do an Indigo Girls show. He needed someone to mix it. He was just doing they were doing a one-off, and he asked me to come and mix it. And I did that, which subsequently a few years later led me to working for them full time. And I worked for them from like 97 till about early 2000, 2004 or 5. Yeah. But that was, and that was another thing where I was kind of like all over. It was, from sheds to theaters to college arenas to, and just kind of preparing me to be prepared for anything, because their show was had a lot going on. The girls had about 20 different acoustic instruments between them, and then they had a full band, and they would have their support acts come back on during the encore and play with their full band. So it's like 2 full bands going at the same time. So it was a lot to juggle, and it was really incredible music. I mean, I've been really lucky that everyone I've worked for has just been so incredibly talented. And while it might not have been the style of music that I grew up listening to, it was definitely, enjoyable to mix. So
it's a funny one, because, I mean, obviously, being in from the UK, you mentioned Joan Osborne, Spin Doctors, you mentioned Blues Traveller a minute ago as well, and Indigo Girls, I think, are kind of one of those bands a bit like Hootie and the Blowfish that just didn't translate.
Right,
into the UK. We have a whole group of bands who are from the UK who I think have kind of never really translated into the US, like Pulp and, Blur and those kind of, I know Blur had an all right kind of time, but certainly the massive success that we from the UK on this side of the pond saw bands like Matchbox 20 having, it never really translated into the UK. Did you ever get the chance to go abroad with any of those acts, and how different was it?
Yeah, Spin Doctors, we did a lot of touring in Europe. And Indigo Girls went to Australia. In the beginning, they didn't do much in the UK, like, cause you said, they just didn't, I think towards one of my last tours, we did a tour of the UK and Ireland. And it was, theaters, but with other artists that I've worked for, I've done a lot of international touring, which I love. Yeah.
Can you put your finger on why those sort of bands from America don't tend to translate to the huge amounts that they do? I mean, I know there's been a few that have done. Counting Crows is an example, I think, of a band who have seemed very kind of American, who have managed to kind of translate and become a very big deal over here. But a lot of those bands, it just, they don't seem to translate. I mean, did you ever notice a difference in the audiences or of the way that people were? Then could you kind of work out why that was?
Well, Indigo Girls, I think they're more known as like folk rock, and that's a very Americana kind of style. So I think a lot of their music, you kind of have to grow up here to get it, maybe, or that's maybe why it doesn't translate. Some of the other ones, it may be that they have music on a soundtrack on a movie that was a hit, so that's why. Oh, I know that band from that movie, so that they may have more of a following outside of the US for that reason. But like, I think there's certain genres, like the rock and the metal genre. I worked for Mr. Big for years, and those guys are still huge in Asia, can sell out arenas in Asia and Japan. And we go to Japan and we treat it like royalty, where in America, they can't get arrested, like they're still playing clubs. So rock and metal, in places like Germany and Asia, is still, that translates really well. But, and then Melissa Etheridge, I did Melissa Etheridge for several tours, and she was always huge in Germany. When I worked for Joan Osborne, we actually opened for her in Germany, and she was selling out arenas, and she still has a strong following there. Go figure, So it's a weird thing. I don't know.
It is weird. I mean, my girlfriend's from South Carolina, and she always says to me, like I say, Blues Traveler and
Dave Matthews.
Oh my God, Dave Matthews. Yes, Dave Matthews. All the time, Dave Matthews. Constantly. He's in the other room laughing right now. But that stuff just, I'm always like, I don't know who this is. I don't know who Toadies are. Do you know what I mean? I don't know. Yeah. And Indigo Girls. And I think the Dixie Chicks got kind of quite big and infamous over here after what they said on stage. But it is interesting that somebody like Joan Osborne would translate in Germany of all places, and she had that one hit, and it was a massive hit over here, but that was kind of the end of it. And Melissa Etheridge, I don't know if I could tell you one of her songs, to be honest, and that's might just be my ignorance, but she just wasn't very big over here. It's a weird thing. We had Oasis. Don't really think it's the same sort of thing. Do you know what I mean? It's just a little different. Anyway, there you go. There's the sort of cultural differences coming up. So after doing Indigo Girls, I mean, looking through the kind of CV of people you've done, I particularly would like to talk about Gwen Stefani, who's somebody who really, really did translate to everyone and everywhere in the world. That first Gwen Stefani album is one of the great pop albums of this millennium, I think, that first Gwen Stefani album. And, obviously already a successful artist. How did you get involved with Gwen, and what was it like doing those solo shows with her?
From what I heard was like when she made that record, it was just kind of, stuff she wanted to do that had nothing to do with No Doubt. She just had this different style that she wanted to pursue. And I believe she was only intending to make a record and never tour it. So when they released it and it was doing so well, they decided, well, she has to do promo. So all she was doing was, TV shows around the world to promote the record, like, TV appearances here and there. And, I was on tour. I think I was doing Thievery Corporation at the time. So she had her crew from No Doubt that were out doing these promo shows, but it would be like, okay, we have a week of shows here. Then 3 weeks later, we'll have another week of shows. And then 3 weeks later. So it was so sporadic that people were getting other tours coming in. So they were leaving. And what happened was the guy who was mixing front of house, they were winding down. It was going to be like the last 2 weeks of promo, and he got offered a tour. And I think it was with Avril Lavigne or something. So he suggests, it's like, well, and we knew each other. He said, well, is Michelle available? And I was just about to do a little tour with Thievery Corporation that was only maybe like 2 weeks long or so. And they offered me the job. They said, would you want to finish, these Gwen shows? I'm like, well, sure. So we did the last few shows, and then they added a couple festivals, like live festivals, because everything up until that point was just TV. So they added a few festivals, and when she did these festivals, she was blown away by the response. And at that point, and she just had so much fun that she said, well, I've got to tour this record. I want to see who bought it. Like, I can't believe all these people are coming out to see this. So that's when then she decided to tour. So that's how I just, again, right timing worked out. I got in there, and, her first tour we did, it was just the US, but it was insane. It was, all NHL hockey arenas, and they would sell almost completely around the stage. It would be about 280 degrees of seats around the stage, and sold out everywhere, and just screaming girls for hours. And, but she's amazing. I mean, like, the show was, lights and video and costume changes. It was nothing like she's ever done. With no doubt, she just runs around and does her thing. And this was, she's running around the stage in 9-inch platform heels and all these crazy costumes with sets pieces coming in and out, and dancers, and it was choreographed, and it was, there was so much video. So it was totally synced to video. So this thing had to be, the timing of everything was down to the second because of the video. Where no doubt, they just play, they just do what they do. And, this was very, very different for her, but she's amazing. I mean, she was incredible. It was such a fun show to be a part of. And she also had an incredible band. So we just had a really, really good time on that. Yeah.
How difficult a sort of challenge was it to capture that type of music live? Because, on record, it sounds, I think the thing about pop music sounds almost cartoonish and otherworldly. Do you know what I mean? Compared to something like Spin Doctors and folk and rock and stuff, you hear those very, sort of real sounding instruments. Pop music sounds synthetic and alien. Do you know what I mean? How difficult is it to recapture that live?
Well, we had an amazing musical director, and he actually, because her records as well had something like, like 20 different producers. So every song was produced by 10 different guys. And so they all had very different, unique sounds. And the musical director for her tour, he was able to break it down to, okay, the band were all amazing players, and they were all playing live. So that gave like a real raw, cohesive, organic sound to it. And then whatever, we had some track, but it was just stuff like samples and things that there wasn't enough people on stage to play. So you'd hear like a little bit of keyboard part here and there and some, things like that. But it started out where, with all these different drum samples on the record, the drummer, who was Zach Alford, him and his drum tech were programming every different sample. Okay, well, the snare is this sample on this song. The drum is, an 808 on this song. The kick drum is on 808 on this song. And then, we have this snare sample on this song. And so when we started rehearsing every song, like your drums are kind of the foundation of everything. So you got to get that drum mix together. And once that's happening, usually stays pretty solid and holds everything together. But what was happening was the drum mix was completely changing for every single song because we had all these different samples coming and going. And so, we ended up working on, let's just find, one sound. Like, we're going to use the organic drums. And then there's a couple songs where it's clearly like a specific sample that's crucial to the song that will go to that. But so it was just working with the band to find that consistency, instead of changing every sound for every song.
Yeah.
And because the musical director was just so good that he really turned some of the stuff made it way more musical than it was on the record. And that was it was just coming from having such talented players, I think, that really, it gave it a life that it didn't have. I mean, the record was great, but there was so much more life in the show that, you would go to see it and it just kind of breathed as opposed to listening to the record,
That's cool. What about the challenge of mixing over the top of, like you said, screaming teenage girls?
Yeah, we actually did, I don't know if it was the first tour or the second tour, where we played LA, and it was I think it was Irvine Amphitheater. And as a surprise, she was having the band, No Doubt band, because she never did any No Doubt songs during this tour. She only did her solo record, which was really kind of cool, But every night, you had the No Doubt fans that wanted to hear I'm Just a Girl or Spiderweb or whatever. So when we played LA, she had planned that as a surprise for the encore, No Doubt was going to come out and she was going to do, 3 or 4 No Doubt songs. So in general, every night, the screaming was kind of crazy, but they'd scream a little bit, then they'd sing, and then they'd calm down, then they'd scream. And when we played Irvine, so they go off the stage for the encore, everything goes black, and they started the first couple notes of I'm Just a Girl in the black. It was all blacked out, and the crowd kind of goes a little crazy, like, oh my God, she's finally going to play it. And the lights come up, and there's No Doubt on the stage with the No Doubt backdrop, and she's in her regular No Doubt kind of clothing. The crowd, oh my God, like you had goosebumps. It was so loud. It was like, 20 jet planes taking off around you. It was insane. And they just screamed through the entire song. Like they were so excited. They were bouncing out of their seats. It was really kind of cool, It was just, but it was louder than anything you could imagine, and there's just, you have to kind of, there's a happy medium, it's at a point where you can't hurt people by trying to get louder than they are. When the crowd is that loud and you try and get louder than them, you're going to hurt people and damage their hearing. So you just find that space where they can still hear it. If they want to hear it better, they can just be quiet, but you can't fight to get on top of it where it's so loud that, you don't hear them. Otherwise people go home deaf.
I'd like to have seen that No Doubt Reformation
it was great.
Although it sounds like I would have liked to have heard it as well, but it sounds like that might have been quite difficult at that show. So, I mean, you've actually, after that, looking at your kind of CV and the people that you've worked with, I mean, you've mentioned Mr. Big, Styx, Goo Goo Dolls as well, another massive band. Yeah. Again, never really translated that much into the UK, but as I understand it, the Goo Goo Dolls are a huge, huge band in the US.
Yeah, they do. We actually did. The first tour I did with them was a UK tour, and it's funny because I still remember this one show in Birmingham because we were doing a lot of theaters and some clubs, and it was the gig in Birmingham was up on the 3rd floor of a building, and oddly enough, the desk that you see in the picture here is the console that I was using, right, and we couldn't get it in the building.
It's big.
The load in was up this flight of stairs at the back that the ceiling was too low. So the desk was too tall for them to carry it up normally. And if they laid it on its side, it was too wide for them to fit up the stairway. So I ended up mixing outside. We set up some speakers and I mixed in outside the back of the building in this little like smoking area, and had my laptop set up on my desk with a screen mirroring. So we had another laptop on stage so I could actually see what was going on, and watch it on my laptop and mix the show from there. And that was really an interesting show. But it worked out great because I had my system tech. I had him just sitting at the inside at the front of house mix position with a ClearComm headset where he could talk to me. So if anything got kind of crazy, he could be like, yeah, the vocal's getting lost. So I'd bring the vocal up, or the keyboards are a little buried, and, make adjustments like that. But yeah, they do, in the US, they do, amphitheaters, small arenas, all kinds of stuff. And a lot of these bands, though, they do, it's whatever. It's the summer, it's the amphitheaters. In the fall, it could be theaters one day or a small arena the next day. It's a little all over the map.
I also wanted to ask you about your time with Adam Lambert. Adam Lambert's obviously gone on to be, well, he's the new Freddie Mercury, isn't he? Right?
Yeah.
When did you work with Adam? And I was going to say, could you have seen him becoming, the guy singing those songs that you were listening to in your bedroom as a right. child? But I don't think anyone could have seen that.
Yeah.
But Adam, what's he like? He seems like a very enigmatic young man.
Oh, he's incredible. I just did a handful of shows with him. I never actually toured with him. It was a lot of one-offs and some TV stuff like that. But it was a couple years before he started doing the Queen. I think he had done the American Idol where he was like the runner up or something. And then he started doing a solo tour. And it was right after that because I got called to come in and do a couple shows, and he's just got such a presence. You meet the kid, and he's an incredibly handsome guy. And it's, like Gwen, like there's these people that when they're standing in front of you, they have it, whatever it is. You can't take your eyes off them. They just have such a presence that it just exudes from them. And he had a really incredible way of communicating with the audience. We were doing one day we did a big show, Central Park. And it was, I think it was a free show. They would do it on like one of the morning TV shows. And the next day he's in a little studio doing a live broadcast show with, maybe 50 people. But his presence with the audience, you could, it was the same. It wasn't like, oh, this is just a tiny show, so I'm not going to hear, he would just give it all every show, no matter what it was. And incredibly talented. I mean, what a voice. So I never got to do any of the stuff with him with the Queen, which would have been incredible. But yeah, he's just really a great performer.
That's got to be a bucket list ambition for you, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you've got the In with Adam Lambert. Surely you could wangle that when they come back. Yeah,
that would be full circle. That would definitely be a full circle moment.
He was quite controversial at the time, wasn't he? Because he'd come off of American Idol, and then he, his sexuality came out, and he was doing quite, the risque show, which I think alienated a fairly large portion of his fan base. I don't know if you saw any of that or were around any of that to witness that kind of controversy that he was going through.
I was a couple years after that, but my friend was the tour manager for him during that point, and it was kind of it was I think he was just trying to find his voice and like, okay, well, this is who I am. I'm not who this TV show is putting me out to be. Now I have a chance to really show who I am and find my voice in my music and my style. And he was definitely kind of, I think it was growing pains that a lot of artists, when they're young and getting started, when you're under the guise of the record company says you have to do this, but that's not really what I want to do, and I think he finally had a bit of freedom where he could just say, I'm going to be me. And, I think a lot of the people who watched American Idol were quite shocked to see who he was. But in the end, I don't think it hurt him because his fan base is quite strange. We had a lot of middle-aged women and old ladies and then young girls and it's kind of all over the map. So he's such an entertainer. And I think sometimes people can, usually see beyond whatever else. And like, this person's incredible. I really like his music and his voice. And, look at Elton John, back in the day. It's I think I still remember when my mother realized he was gay. I'm like, Mom, are you kidding me? You're just figuring that out, but he's so good. I'm like, well, that doesn't mean because he's gay doesn't mean he's not going to be good. It's just, So luckily music, I think, is able to transcend a lot of that sometimes, but I don't think it hurt his fan base really. I think if anything, it gave him the fan base that he really wanted. So,
well, he's doing very well for himself now.
Yeah.
Speaking of another artist who you've already mentioned, actually, but you said you were working with him just before the pandemic kind of shut everything down. What's it like working with Elvis Costello, who's a living legend? And I'm usually a bit like, legend, but in this case, really.
Yeah, he's amazing. I mean, what a catalog of songs. When, I grew up, I was more I grew up on 80s rock and metal. Like that was kind of more my scene. And I knew I was familiar with his hits, but not real, deep into his catalog. So when I got hired, and the first thing I always do is ask, for them to send me the catalog so I can start learning all the songs. There was something like 500 songs. I was like, oh my God, I don't have enough time to learn all of this. So, but I mean, what an incredible range of styles, and everything from pop to punk to Broadway to blues, it's just so the shows, and he's definitely a performer. I mean, he he very much feeds off his audience and will read the audience very well. So if he makes a set list, which we always joke, it's like he'll make a set list at the beginning of the night and you can just throw it away after the third song because he never follows it. It's kind of like, well, I'm losing the audience, so I'm going to do a more upbeat song than what I had planned, or the audience, I've got them in the palm of my hand, so I'm really going to go deep now. Like he can really work it like no one I've seen. And just, what an incredible band, it was just such a pleasure. And the last show we did before we had to cancel was in London at Hammersmith. So it was, just to be mixing him there, it was there was a point where my system tech and I looked at each other like, this is really pretty awesome, and the audience was great. It was a great show. And, sadly it was the last one we did. But it was a great way to end as well,
Great way to end. Brilliant way to end. I mean, like you've already said, the range on the guy from Joe Strummer to Burt Bacharach, he's done a lot, isn't it? Like absolutely incredible back catalogue. I love Elvis Costello.
And lovely guy. I mean, really lovely guy.
He seems like he would be just, there are some people who just seem like they'd walk in off the street and that's who they would be, and he really seems like that one of those people. Yeah.
We did. I did a couple just little private shows with him where it was just him, by himself, and he'd have a couple acoustic guitars, an electric guitar, and a grand piano, and just kind of like sit there almost like a storyteller's episode. He'd play a song and he'd tell you a story, and it is just like, to me, that was some of the best stuff we did because it's so intimate and he's so personable. He's so like, you feel like, if you didn't know him or you work for him, you feel like you could just go out and have a beer with him and sit there and tell stories all night. It's just, there's not a lot of people that can really translate like that, I think.
Who would be your favorite artist that you've worked with in terms of somebody that you've gone, oh my God, I'm getting to actually create the sound for this person in your career?
It would be a tie. It would have to be Styx and Mr. Big. Styx, because they were my favorite band growing up. They were one of the bands that made me want to do this. And oddly enough, that ties back into Gwen Stefani. The keyboard tech on that tour, we used to talk about all the time who our favorite bands were, and his was Journey and mine was Styx. And, and at that time I kept telling people like, I want to mix Styx. And, Styx, I think at that time was maybe just doing some small state fairs and little gigs here and there. And people would laugh at me like, they're kind of has-been. I'm like, I don't care. They're amazing. So come to find out, a couple years after, or I was actually after the second Gwen Stefani tour, about 2 months later, the keyboard tech calls me up and he says, you're never going to believe who I'm working for. And I said, who? And he said, Styx. I'm like, you're kidding. He's like, I'm going to get you out here. Well, a couple of years later, it turned out they needed someone to fill in for their front of house, and they called me and I filled in. And then a couple of years later, when they were looking for someone to, sadly, their longtime front of house, Gary Loiseau, he had been diagnosed with cancer. So they were looking for his, eventual replacement. So I got the gig, and it was the first gig I ever had that I didn't have to do any homework. I knew that music so inside and out that I knew every little guitar part that was coming and every little keyboard part and every solo. It was so ingrained in my mind that normally I do so much listening prior to a tour just to make sure I'm really familiar. And it was just, and they're an incredible band to mix. It's just, you're really mixing all night long. There's a lot going on there. And to just have, they still play and sing as well as they did, 30, 40 years ago. They're, really, really great musicians and great people. And the other one is Mr. Big, which again, a band that when I just started touring, they were kind of making some noise around the US, and what incredible musicians, 4 just powerhouses of talent.
Supergroup,
there.
Aren't they?
Yeah.
Absolute supergroup, yeah.
I used to have, at the time I was doing so much pop and female artists or acoustic music, and I was just dying to mix rock and roll. And, I was just like, I was kind of pigeonholed into all these, pop girl singers or girls with guitars. And all I wanted to do was mix rock and metal. And, that gig came up, and I'd known they'd broke up, in the early 2000s. And, this was around 2009. And I got a call about it. I'm like, oh my God, like, are they even, I didn't even know they were still together. And they said, no, they're reuniting to do this big tour in Japan. And And I got the gig, and it was funny because I remember sending the manager asked for my resume, and I remember thinking, oh my God, he's going to look at it and it's just a list of women and acoustic and pop music. And he's going to be like, there's no way we're hiring this girl to mix, these rock gods. So I wrote him this big letter, like a cover letter with my CV to say, look, don't be afraid with all this pop and acoustic and, female acts, because I grew up on 80s rock and metal, and I'm really a rocker at heart, and I can really mix this stuff, and something to that effect. So, needless to say, I got the gig, and then I thought, all right, well, here I am. After being in the business for 20 some years, I'm going to have to prove myself all over again, because these guys are rock legends, and, they've had amazing careers, and I'm like, God, this is going to, they're going to think like, oh, what does this girl know about mixing rock and roll? So I walked into rehearsals the first day. We were doing rehearsals before the tour, and I remember walking in, and it was instant family. Like I never had that feeling ever again or before. It was just this immediate like respect, like a mutual respect. Like they all just, were like, thank you so much for doing this tour for us. I'm like, are you kidding me? Thank you for hiring me. It was just, but I just felt like I was coming home. I was finally here mixing the kind of music that I'd always wanted to mix. And we did this tour in Japan. They did 3 weeks in Japan. I think the tour sold out in something like 15 minutes. It was just arenas all over Japan. And we traveled it was the 4 guys in the band, a tour manager, myself, and 2 backline techs. It was a very small group, and we traveled together, stayed at the same hotels. It was a very tight family unit. And, those guys are like my 4 big brothers. And yeah, it was just such a perfect gig, and they're still family to me. So it was, between them and Styx, they'd have to be my 2 favorite.
That's pretty cool. I saw Mr. Big played Bloodstock. I don't know if you're aware of Bloodstock Festival. You don't know if you were there, if you did that one, but Bloodstock was
a couple of years ago. Yeah.
Oh, that was you. Yeah. Cause I was like, Mr. Big, there was a band called Mr. Big in the 90s. They can't be playing with bloody all these like death metal bands, surely. Yeah. And then out they walked, and I was like, oh wow. But they absolutely, people lapped it up. They loved it.
It was funny because it was 2011, and they, we did the tour in 2009. It was their reunion tour. And in 2011, they put out a new record, and we did we did all those European festivals, like, Bloodstock, Sweden Fest, or Sweden Rock, Hellfest, all of that. And I remember when we were getting ready to start the tour, the band was kind of like, like some of the shows we were on, and it's like Limp Bizkit and Rob Zombie are headlining, and we're like the 3rd or 4th band on the bill, and they're thinking like, they're thinking back to the days of like, what was the 80s metal fest in the US? It was like Ozfest or Monsters of Rock, where, people would throw bottles of urine or worse at the stage and boo you off the stage, and the guys were all like, what are we doing with all these really hardcore bands? Like we're Slipknot, like we're going to get booed off the stage. And they were really nervous. And I remember I think it was Hellfest, and we were the 2nd band on the main stage. And the first band was some sort of like local-ish band, like all in these really crazy goth costumes with lots of screaming. And so I went out to front of house, and I had started, dialing up my console, and at the time there was maybe like 50 people in the audience. It's the first band on. There's nobody there, and by the time they finished, and we're rolling our stuff on stage and getting ready to go, I look up, and all of a sudden there's like 20,000 people in front of the stage. Like, where did they all come from? And the band came out, and they just kicked ass. They rocked, and they had everybody in the palm of their hand. They played great, and the best part was that all of the crew and all the other bands for that festival were on the side of the stage watching them. And I was just so proud, like just to see them get, the respect that they deserve. Cause they were such unsung, heroes of their, the time. And, it was really incredible. And every festival that we did, it was like that the bands and crew would come out and watch them, and, just so many, so much props to them, and people just kind of like, oh God, you guys are amazing. And it was really cool to see.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, they were great, actually. I remember being, oh yeah, they got loads of good songs in there. This is really good. You kind of touched on it, Michelle, and I'm afraid it's probably the question you've been asked more than any other question in the history of your life. But being a lady in in the rock and metal industry I think has become less of a kind of a surprise to people in these days. But going back to when you started, I mean, how much opposition did you have from people saying to you like, well, you can't really do that, or people being just surprised that you were there to do the job that you were doing?
Yeah. Well, I mean, before, even when I first just announced I wanted to be a recording engineer, everybody that I knew thought, you're going to be a DJ? I'm like, no, I want to make records, not spin records. So I didn't get opposition as opposed to being, oh, well, women can't do that. It was more so, you can't do that. You need to get a real career and a real degree and a real job. You're never going to make a living doing this. So I was kind of on my own, finding my path into the business. And then when I started right out of school, when I started working at this little local sound company, and it was, I would do a lot of shows where it was this one of the guys in the shop, and I would take a van full of gear, go, set up at the whatever bar and grill, and sound check the band. And then we leave and go get dinner and come back to do the show. And the most hard time I would get was from the bouncers, because they always thought I was the guy's girlfriend, not actually working. So they would try to charge me a cover charge. And I'm like, no, I'm working. No, you're not working. You're his girlfriend. I'm like, no, I'm not his girlfriend, And so I would get more grief from, people on the outside, never really from anybody, like the people, the artists I worked for, the crew. There's a lot of surprise, of course, like you're the sound engineer, but the minute they see that you're a professional, you're here to do the job and you know what you're doing, then, they respect you, or they'll just be like, oh, she's actually pretty good, which is kind of silly because they wouldn't say, oh, he's actually pretty good. But, like the most, I think I was more of a struggling to get people to take me seriously, that no, I'm not just married or dating someone in the band or a groupie. I'm actually here to do a job, and it was usually from people at the venue, either the stage hands or the local crew or whatever, never from anybody that I worked with. Part of it could have just been that I was so, this was what I'm going to do. And there's, nothing's going to stop me, that I just kind of ignored a lot of that, the noise, and just powered through it. But yeah, it never got in my way. You always meet with surprise when people find out you're the sound engineer and not the wardrobe girl or the production assistant. And that still happens to this day. I'll walk into a venue and people, are like, oh, wardrobe's down the hall. Like, yeah, I'm actually the sound engineer. And, they look at you like, what? Oh, well, that's cool, and there's nothing wrong with surprise. It's, but yeah, it's never really been an issue for me, luckily.
Okay. Well, that's good. I was going to ask, you just sort of mentioned it again, but I was wondering if it had sort of lessened over the years, because I think it's, like I say, it's become less of a thing.
Sadly, I actually co-founded an organization called soundgirls.org back in 2013 with another woman engineer, Carrie Keyes, who's the monitor engineer for Pearl Jam. And the whole mission of Sound Girls was to kind of reach out to young women and let them know that you don't have to be a guy to do this. And if anyone who wants to get into audio engineering, we're here to offer support and empowerment and, give you a community of women who are doing this. And a lot of the young women starting out in the last 10 years, sadly, we're hearing horror stories from them of how much worse it is than it ever was when we started. And
really?
I don't know if it's more of a, Carrie and I both started around the same time in the late 80s. And, we were kind of the unicorn. Like you could count on probably, both hands how many women were doing what we were doing. And now, because there's so many more, is it because now, the guys in the business are feeling threatened, or is it, the political climate in our country at the moment, where it's okay to just be sexist and whatever. And, all of that's allowed. But I've actually had some of the most ridiculous sexist comments made to me over the last 5 years, not by people in the business, but just, but at the same time, it's like, this is way worse than it was when I started, and there were no women doing this. So how is it worse now? And it's unfortunate, but it still happens, and it's happening at either it's just more blatant now, or it's happening more. I don't know what the story is there.
That's really weird. That's really weird and quite depressing thing to hear, to be honest. I mean, like you say, the climate in both of our countries is not the best in terms of having respect for kind of anyone really
right,
at the moment.
Exactly.
But that's not a good thing to hear. Well, hopefully that will improve again. To kind of close up, is there a favourite venue stroke city that you have? A favourite place in the world, or a favourite venue to mix, whether it be just the mix or the kind of the vibe of the venue or whatever it may be. I mean, feel free to.
God, there's so many. Red Rocks is always Red Rocks in Denver is such a great, just beautiful, and it's open air, and it's a really incredible place. Load in and load out is terrible, but the actual show part of it is great. Budokan is always fun, because there's just an energy when you play there in Tokyo, and there's so much history there as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I love touring for, the fact of getting to go so many different places, and yeah. That's
great. Yeah. Red Rock. I'd love to go to Red Rocks. I recently watched the Gojira, live show from Red Rocks, and I mean, U2 are like my favorite band. So the U2 at Red Rocks thing from back in the day is always the one that I think of. And anytime anyone plays that, I'm always like, would love to go there. Looks great. We're going to close up just by asking what we always ask at the end of the show, which is your favourite day on the job ever, and also your least favourite day on the job ever.
Well, that one's easy. I don't know how much time we have.
We got enough.
Well, least favorite day. There was a tour I did with Mr. Big in 2009. We went to India, and the whole tour was just kind of crazy. But we played in Dimapur, which is kind of on the northeast corner bordering Burma. And this was the third show in like about 10 days and a lot of, crazy travel and exhaustion. And it was a big polo field, and there was about 15,000 people in the audience. And the barricade was literally just strung together bamboo poles. So the security for the concert was also like Indian military police that looked like they were about 15 years old, and they're all carrying rifles. So the people are jammed in there, and these guys are pushing them back over the barricade with their rifles. And I'm just looking around, like, oh my God, this is not good. So my system tech is right before the band goes on. We're at the front of house, and the system tech says to me, yeah, it's, there's like another 5,000 people outside, but they won't let them in because we're at capacity. And I'm thinking like, oh, there's going to be rioting. People are going to die. This is not good. So then he says to me, yeah, it's amazing that you guys are here. And I said, well, what do you mean? He goes, well, no one ever comes here. Like, what do you mean? He's like, oh, it's really bad here. He said, it's a very dangerous place. There's all this tribal warfare, and there's kidnapping and murder going on all the time. And the only person who ever played here was Bruce Dickinson. Now, I don't know if you've seen Scream for Me, Sarajevo.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I had toured on the tour we did right before this tour was with Bruce's bass player from that, Chris Dale, who was Bruce's bass player in Skunkworks and also teched for Billy Sheehan on the previous Mr. Big tour. And Chris had just told me the whole story about this, trip to Sarajevo. So this is fresh in my mind. And he tells me, Bruce is the only person who's ever played here. I'm like, oh God. And he says, but that's okay. The king paid off the tribal leaders not to fight so we could have the concert this weekend. And just as he says that, the band walks on stage and we start the show. And I'm like, great, now I have to mix a show with all of that going around my head.
Oh my God. Yeah.
But
for those of you who haven't seen that documentary,
it's incredible. Yeah.
And terrifying.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've heard mad stories about that part of the world.
Yeah.
But you got through it though, or I mean, you're here.
Well,
so
yeah. So, they played a great show. And then after the show, we loaded all of our gear into a truck and we had a 45-minute or so drive back to our hotel. So we're waiting around, and everybody's piled into vans and cabs. And the monitor engineer and I are in this cab with one of the promoters people, and we're sitting there for like a half an hour. Like, why are we not going? Why can't we? We're exhausted. Like, we just want to get back to our hotel and go to sleep. And we're waiting and waiting and waiting. And she finally tells us that we have to wait for the truck with the gear because there has to be a car in front and a car behind. Otherwise, the driver will just drive off and steal all of our gear. You're like, are you kidding me? So in the meantime, everyone else is gone. And, we're just waiting for the other promoter people to finish up so that we can escort the gear truck back to the hotel, get back to the hotel. And it's kind of this weird, the hotel is actually being built, and we have these little cottages that we're staying in. And there's like a upstairs, room and a downstairs room. And I get up to my room and it's just full of bugs. It's just, everywhere, just swarming with bugs. The water shuts off at night for 12 hours. So you only have water up until 9 o'clock at night, then no water. So there's a big bucket in the bathroom. And I'm like, why is there this big giant bucket full of water? Oh, well, there's no water. And, the AC and the electricity would come and go. And it was just kind of at the end of all that. And you're walking into, I just want to go to sleep. And like, oh my God, beetles the size of your fist. And it was crazy. It was definitely, one for the storybooks.
That sounds so horrible. I'm a prude and a prissy man, but I would not like that at all.
I did a lot of camping in my youth and in my teenage years, and I remember being like, I like camping, but this is a whole other level of,
Yeah, not for me. There's got to be a best day to combat that.
Yeah, well, and same band, Mr. Big, we were in, I think it was in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and the day was just, everybody at the venue was great. It was a great system, a great sound system, and a great crew. And the support act was on. And I remember as soon as they finished, you could hear the audience. It was, like 5,000 people crammed in there, and they're chanting, Mr. Big, from the minute the support act finished. And they were so loud that the band could hear them backstage. So as soon as the lights went out, they went nuts. The audience just goes crazy. And the band was so pumped up because they could hear that. So they came out and they're on fire. And the audience was singing along at the top of their lungs, every single song. And it was just one of those magical moments where it sounded great. The band played great. The audience was amazing. And you literally could feel your hair stand up on end. Like, it was just electrifying. And the energy in the room that night was just so incredible. It was probably one of the best shows I've ever been to and done. Yeah.
Amazing. That's what it's all about.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully you get to do it again soon, Michelle. I'm sure you would like to be out in the world bringing people music again. I mean, I feel like a broken record, but because I say at the end of every podcast, but it's something that we all miss. And I think particularly, you must be absolutely itching to get back out there. I'm sure as lovely as your cats are.
Yeah, definitely.
You must be itching to get out there right now.
Yes, absolutely.
But anyway, Michelle, thank you so much for chatting to us. It's been lovely.
Thank you for having me.
Nah, that's quite all right. Anytime. And I will be hitting you up for some cat. As we speak, actually, my cat is just getting in a fight right now. So that feels like quite a good time to leave it. Thanks very much. It's been wicked.
Thank you.
All right, there you go. That was Michelle. What an absolutely fascinating journey through many, many acts. Of many different genres and many different varieties she's had. Lovely to chat to her, and as ever, another great guest on the podcast. And if you've enjoyed that, then we'll be back next week with even more stories from behind the scenes in the world of live music. As I said, go over to signaturebrew.co.uk, put the code ROADCREW in the checkout. You can get 10% off of all their beers. We will be back next week, as I said as well. If you want to give us a little bit of love on the old social channels, Instagram, Facebook, at Road Crew Pod on Twitter, you can do that, and we would very much appreciate that. I'll be back next week. Thank you very much for listening, and we will see you soon.